When Master of Puppets came out, I got a call from a friend's house, a bunch of like punk rockers, Spikes, Liberty Spikes, you know, the whole. Master of Puppets had come out that morning. Somebody had gotten a copy of it, and they were like, you got to get over here. I went over to the house, and there was just this room full of people sitting there blasting this record, just in awe. Like, it raised the bar so high. Like, nobody had, thrash, this, that, it had been going on. It was great, it was cool. That album came out, and it just crushed everything that had happened before it. It was a whole new level.
When I started listening to the record, I was like, wow, now I gotta wait to go into the studio to try and get close to that, you know? And then you go up on stage, it's sound check, and you're checking your guitar, and you're like, dude, we gotta do some work here, you know? At least that's how I felt.
With Master of Puppets, they just took it to what I think is the highest degree they ever have, where they not only created a genre that they were the masters of, but they started breaking some of the rules that everyone else was following within that genre, yet still kept incredibly true to it, and managed to write these songs that were just as powerful as their early stuff, if not more so.
When that record came out, man, it just, they proved, Metallica proved they were the best metal band in the world with Master of Puppets. Up till that point, nobody had done anything even close. And nobody has, well, certainly Metallica has not since, you know? That was their masterpiece.
To me, that's a great statement in that form. It was the last pure, in-your-face Metallica, real Metallica album that came out. And unfortunately, the last with Burton, who died, I believe, in '86.
The only time I saw Dave go off was when Cliff Burton passed, and I never saw anyone lose it that bad. Yeah, that was... So, I mean, and that should tell, I mean, that's how, you know, close he was, you know, to those guys, so... I mean, that's probably a lot to carry around, you know?
Master of Puppets does mark the end of an era. Unfortunately, the way it marked it was because just a few months after its release, Cliff Burton was tragically killed.
What happened that night was that the driver supposedly hit a patch of ice and the bus skidded. It shattered the windows and Cliff got thrown out of the bus and the bus landed on top of him.
However, even if Cliff had lived, I'm sure this would have been the end of another part of Metallica's career, and their next album would have moved them on again, as indeed it did. But Master of Puppets was the album that broke them through in America, certainly. Big player on the album charts. It sold over 500,000 copies very fast, which suddenly made them a commercially viable proposition. We weren't talking about a band that could sell 10 to 20,000 albums. You're talking about a band reaching up towards 500,000 and beyond. So suddenly, they took themselves into a new level. And in doing so, also I feel, hyped up a lot of other interest in the band, in bands around them. Bands such as Testament and Exodus and Megadeth benefited from Metallica's success because everyone was looking around saying, well, Metallica represent this so-called thrash movement. What else is there?
As well as sending reverberations through the entire metal community, the tragic death of Cliff Burton also had a life-changing impact on the remaining members of Metallica. With the blessing of Burton's family, they recruited new bassist Jason Newsted. Having defined thrash so comprehensively, it now seemed time for the band to move on. By this stage, the scene they left behind was not exactly in the best of health.
I think there had been a lot more major success if bands could have stayed together and not maybe had 1, 2, 3 all members on hard drugs, you know. And then the double-edged sword there also is the technique went flying out the window here because of that drug. The dexterity is just incredible because, I mean, speed makes you totally focus and get way beyond into it. So you have guys that honed their skills and their speed on drums or their speed on guitar to speed up their nose. And some guys could totally hang. You know, you have those dinosaur Lemmy-like characters who it's never really going to do anything bad to their lives except propel them. And you have other guys that are just beaten down into a hole savagely. So, yeah, I think a lot of bands spun their wheels for 6 months longer than they needed to. Maybe could have jumped on some progression, you know, indecision, second guessing from that drug. And it killed a lot of people here too.
I think when right around the time Peace Sells came out, we were pretty messed up. And I think if we would have been, you know, had our eye on the prize more, things would have been different. But, you know, we weren't saying, hey, let's go try some different amps. Hey, let's go try and get a better tone. You know, we were thinking, hey, let's go to first, second, and third and central of any major city. You know, that's where our mind was. So, yeah, it definitely probably hurt and still hurts a lot of bands.
In Europe, they still had some gas in the tank, you know, like Creator and Destruction, Sodom. And then right around that point, the late 80s and early 90s was just a terrible, terrible time for music in the Bay Area because thrash died out. And it was largely because of Metallica, in my opinion, because of Metallica's success. Because Metallica got so big, all these bands, they saw that brass ring. They started trying to be really serious. They decided that they wanted to, like, you know, speak to serious sociological issues and politics. And that's a large part what ruined it for me. Because I liked, you know, Testament's first album being about Satan and video games. You know, the first strike is deadly, you know, like snakes and stuff. Cool, you know. Really awesome killer riffs, you know. As soon as they started to get introspective, their music was weakened. That purity of intent was diluted. And that's when you start asking, you know, shouldn't we be getting credit for, you know, being taken seriously? No. Not with thrash. That's not what it was about.
In the years since, Metallica have achieved what few other groups have, transforming from a gang of teenagers worshipping their rock influences to becoming one of the biggest influences in the music world themselves. The legacy and imprint of both thrash and the music that spawned it can still be felt to this day.
Probably the legacy of Newwaberham has been, it produced a couple of big bands like Iron Maiden and Def Leppard and probably Saxon, you know, and the other bands just about struggling underneath. And that in turn influenced the next generation, which has been, you know, Metallica, Megadeth, etc.
There's a huge extreme metal scene, death metal, black metal, and thrash metal led to those things. So that's its legacy, really, the fact that kids all over the world are going to clubs, you know, headbanging to extremely fast, violent metal. That's the legacy of thrash.
The most positive thing you can take away from Bay Area metal is that everybody is just really like go-getters, you know, and you have to go out and get it. And I think that the world appeal of metal and all the way through now, through even new metal, if you talk to all these bands, a lot of them revert back to Bay Area metal bands. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else, you know. Definitely no regrets about coming up in this scene at all, except for the friends I lost, you know, stuff like that. But all the band change and all that stuff doesn't really affect the overall story. It's way more good than bad.